Hi everyone, welcome back. So I'm here today because I want to finish talking about setting boundaries and the last three relationship dynamics that I had mentioned, which is family, extended family members, friends, and your work relationships, whether you're the employer or employee. I'm going to wrap this up with talking about these last three because they're pretty much all the same and similar when it comes to certain things, most parts of setting boundaries, and what that may look like for instance, you want to set boundaries when it comes to your significant other, whether again you're actually married or you're dating someone. You want to be able to keep your relationship separate where you don't let like family interfere. Set your boundaries, like when it comes to visiting or when it comes to hanging out and doing things and being social with one another. I'm applying this to your friends and to family, your extended family, like cousins, siblings, aunts and uncles, blood relatives, I should just say, outside of your spouse or your significant other and your children. It is very important that you do that because that can become a problem. And just as an example, for me, I have to set boundaries when it comes to my friends because though I love hanging out with them, I also have a husband, and having a husband means that I have to still allot some time for maintaining that relationship. How often I have one friend that that my best friend, I have a few best friends, but I have one in particular that is very close to me, and and my husband don't have a problem with us at all, but with her coming over, because at the end of the day, it's not her, it's me. It's my responsibility to make sure that I set those boundaries, that okay, today is not a good day to come visit because I'm trying to spend some quality time with my husband, because I also have my work life, and then I have my children, then I have my grandchildren. So I have a lot of relationships that I have to maintenance, and if you are someone that deals with that as well, you have to set your boundaries. You don't want to create tension in your marriage, in your relationship with your significant other, who you're dating or you're married to. That's important. Okay, same thing with family. Family can come and they can do things. They come in and they consume your time, even as much so you need to be careful about what you share about your private relationship when it comes to your blood relatives and your friends, because a lot of times you could create tension between your spouse slash significant other and your family members or your friends, because if you're close with your friends and your family like I am, they can become very defensive for you. And then at the end of the day, I'm trying to think of an example, like, okay, you had a disagreement with your significant other. Okay, I'm not going to keep saying spouse or person you're dating. You know what I'm talking about. It's a person that you're committed to and you have an intimate relationship with, that's between you and them, that you're building a life with. Okay, so when you're with your significant other and you have a disagreement, and especially if there's already someone in your circle, whether it's blood relative or friend, that already don't really care for your significant other, you don't want to discuss certain things. And even if it's not the case, you still don't want to discuss certain things because it could be a bad thing that happened. But at the end of the day, if you hash out your differences with your significant other, it still looks bad because they're still holding on to that thing that you discussed with them, that you shared with them, that was a situation between you and your significant other. So again, setting boundaries as to what you share, the time that you share is important. And also money, because that's another thing too, not just for your children and your significant other, everybody. This is across the board. You have to set boundaries when it comes to finances, because you don't want to start doing things like lending out money, and then your significant other is like, well, why don't you have X amount of dollars when you should, because they find out. I mean, I'm just putting an example out there, a generic example out there that that can create problems for you and your significant other. This is why it's important to set boundaries. You might have someone that always borrowing. You don't want to do that, because that can also create tension with your private life, your intimate life. And it's just important. So when it comes to the work-life balance, you definitely need to set boundaries. You don't need to tell your employer every little thing. There's things that you should share, but not everybody is for you. Sometimes their employer could be looking for a reason to get rid of you, or vice versa. You as the employer yourself, you don't need to know, you don't need to tell your employee everything, because that can lead to other, uncomfortable situations. You need to set boundaries, and that could be something that's mainly dealing with finances. When it comes to your employer, you don't need to tell them all of your business. When it comes to finances, oh, I'm struggling right now, my husband's not working, or vice versa, my wife's not working and I can't do this, and or my significant other is experiencing substance abuse issues, and this is why I'm always late. Yeah, you should tell them that you're going through personal problems, but you don't have to be so specific sometimes, because what they're looking at as an employer is, okay, you're a risk for me because you're late all the time, or you have to set boundaries. But you have to, I would suggest that you request a moderation, like to modify your work schedule. When you're dealing with issues, you have to set boundaries. You don't need to share everything about your personal life with your employer / even the employee, sharing everything with your employer. Okay, you don't need to know those things, because also that can set a tone for your employee if you're an employer. Because what happens when your employee knows too much of your personal business? They might see that, oh, this business is about to go under, and it may not be that case. So you can't share your financial situations with your company or with your employees all the time, because they can leave you hanging. They could leave you hanging, and you have to set boundaries. It's good to be transparent. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying don't be transparent, but you have to pick and choose your words carefully. You have to set boundaries as to what you're going to share and what you're not going to share, because also that can open a door. That could be a way to open a door for vulnerability. You want to be vulnerable, but you don't want to be too vulnerable. Okay, that's what I'm saying. You need to protect your own interests with honesty. So I hope that makes sense to you when I say setting boundaries. And even when it comes to the employee with the employer, don't be so readily available to, oh, I can work this for you. Don't. It's okay. Do it when it's comfortable for you. Do it if you need to work extra hours, but don't always be the yes person for your employer, because they will take advantage of that. They could take advantage of that. And then when you finally do tell them no, it may become a problem, if that makes sense. Okay? And then the same thing with the employer. Be flexible, but don't be too flexible, because then your employee may take full advantage of your flexibility, you being, so giving and so kind, because you're trying to be a friend. You're trying to be a friend to that employee, but you got to take the friend out of business. And I learned that in a different situation. When you're dealing with business, like, that's just the thing. And I never was a firm believer in looking at things a certain way, but all in all, that is setting boundaries. And when I'm thinking about a scenario that I just recently dealt with, doing business with a friend, I never believed that you couldn't do business with a friend until I had a recent experience. And actually, you cannot always do business with your friends. You can't. It's just not something you can do. Okay? I just feel like that, And if you can, you have to be business partners first before you are friends. That's the way I can look at it, because you already know your expectations with one another. But when you are friendly, and you try to become business partners or doing business with one another, sometimes that can go south, unless you're just doing business with them as far as buying products from them. But when it's dealing with like real business, I don't recommend it, and I don't feel comfortable with it, and I tried it and it doesn't work. But that's not to say it won't work for you. I've always been that one that's been optimistic, like, no, we could do business. And again, I say I do agree, but you have to be business partners before you're friends. It can't be the other way around. That's just my thought, because unless you set clear boundaries from the very beginning, that, hey, when we go into this is what I'm expecting. Not, you can't just assume. In other words, you can't assume that a person is going to know what your expectations are. And same thing, you're not going to know what their expectations are unless you speak about it. And I feel like that's true in any situation. That's just like, with committing to someone, you have to set clear boundaries and what your expectations are with that person. And I dealt with that too when it dealt with my my husband, because and this is my second husband, by the way. So I almost went through a real bad situation in my second marriage with my husband now, because our thing was the money was the issue, and I'll talk about that later when it comes to the different situations that can arise in a marriage or a committed relationship where two people are supposed to be working together to create a life together, the things that arise. So I feel like that you should be able to talk about what you expect in the beginning, especially when it comes to finances, because that was my experience with me and my husband. We went into our first property that we ever bought together, and it was an issue because I came with an already made family, and his expectations was as if we never even had any children, and I had to, it created tension. In other words, is what I'm trying to tell you. So when you're dealing with these things, it's always good to have open conversation as to, okay, this is a big life decision that we're making. So if, and I'm just using this as an example, and this is part of like setting boundaries, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to sit down and talk and clarify things, and talk about what your expectations are for one another, and what you can and cannot do, because that's life altering. That's very much life altering, and it's not easy. It's not easy when it comes to making these decisions and setting boundaries. So very important. I would not ever suggest anything otherwise. So with that said, this will end the last segment of setting boundaries when it comes to relationships and the different dynamics and how each one plays a part with the other. I hope I was very clear on some of the things that you need to be cautious about when you're having to consider all your relationships intertwined with one another. Very important. So this would conclude this segment, and I hope you got something out of it. If you want more content like this, please like and subscribe, and even share with someone else who could benefit from the information that I'm sharing with you. And that would be it. So I want you to have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon with another video. And peace and love.